Good afternoon, everyone. Today is April 24th,
Hold on,
already 2023.
hold on.
Okay. Ready? Again, today is April 24th, 2023, and you have joined the City Health Providence Health and Fight Task Force. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chairwoman Mary Kay Harris,
Present.
Vice Chairman Pedro Espinal,
Present.
Councilwoman Althea Gray is absent. Councilwoman Shelley Peterson, present. Councilor Justin Royals is absent. We have 3 present and 2 absent. We have a quorum.
Let the record also show that we have Councilman Vargas joining us. Thank you for being here. Madam Clerk, could you please read the first item into the roll?
Item number 1, presentation from the Providence Redevelopment Agency on the Housing Trust Fund by Joe Mulligan, Director of Planning and Development, Executive Director of the Providence Redevelopment Agency, and Robert Azar, Deputy Director of Planning.
So we have Mr. Mulligan and Mr. Azar joining us tonight. But before we get started, we have quite a bit of people from the city. And Madam Clerk, if you don't mind, we will take each person by name. I'll start over with our economic development person. Please give your name just in case you have to make a statement. We already have you on record. Please stand and give your name.
Cassandra Thomas, Director of Economic Development, City of Providence. Michael McLaughlin, Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Tim Shea, Manager of Engagement Programs for Planning and Development.
Courtney Hopkins, Chief Operating Officer.
Nick Chicago, Director of Real Estate Planning and Development.
Emily Friedman, Director of Community Development.
Adam McMillan, Associate Director of Community Development.
And Peter Ace is back from PHA.
Thank you. We have quite a bit of crowd here with us tonight. We want to thank the clerks for joining us as well. And we also have Chris Brown and Sally here with us as well from the policy. So we want to hear from you guys, what's going on, and we definitely want to hear some updates from your department. And you can start whatever direction you want to start in and giving us some updates. First of all, I want to say thank you for being here because we are trying our best to do as much discovery of every aspect of any type of possibilities, whether it's tools that the city is using for housing, or whether it is just trying to figure out what's happening out there in the atmosphere. So it's very important to have you guys join us tonight, because it's very important for us as a council to explore this. So anything you can offer us, or anything that you can give us highlight on or open our eyes to, we'll be more than happy.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members, for being here today. Thank you for the invitation to address the committee. We can talk in generalities, I think, about the work that the Planning and Development Department does. And in particular, we'll learn more about that as we embark on the comprehensive plan that will address a lot of the land use issues in and around the surrounding neighborhoods and community throughout Providence. But today we also wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the activities that are undertaken by the Providence Redevelopment Agency, specifically related to the Affordable Housing Trust. And that trust was established in April of, well, it was funded by bond in April of 2021, and the trust was established through a city council ordinance. So on behalf of the council had the foresight to prepare and anticipate some strategies surrounding the housing funding. It was expanded recently by the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, as it's known as, with additional allocations to boost the amount of monies available that we can talk about as we get into a graph later on. The monies are, the bond is financed through a special obligation bond to the city, an original allocation for an amount. Make sure I get the right one here. Currently about 24,746,000 change. It's available in that affordable housing bond with additional monies that was provided by the ARPA funding. They must be used for affordable housing and housing that costs no more than 30% of a household's monthly income. This is part of the affordable housing requirements. The units must be for families earning less than 120% of the area median income. And affordability restrictions must remain for at least 30 years. The funds must be used to fill the final gap in the project's funding and are the last in funds. So developers and proponents who wish to work in the community must pursue traditional financing or different funding mechanisms such as low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, other types of federal grants, or other funders that might be participating in the affordable housing and development universe. And we oversee that funding, and not too long ago released a notice of funding availability to the community that then submitted applications that were reviewed internally, and we identified those that were responsive to that request and have advanced many of those projects forward into the pipeline of opportunities within the housing trust funds. Since 2021, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has supported 693 units of housing. And of those, 556 of the units are at or below 80% of the area median income. So it's quite a success rate over a relatively short period of time for assisting in getting funding for housing development starts in and around the community. 208 of those units are for 30% or below area median income thresholds. 201 are for 60% AMI. 147 are at 80%, and 137 at 120% AMI. It gives you a good range of distribution of different levels of entry for affordable housing. The bond requires periodic payments, which come from the proceeds from the tax stabilization agreements that are coordinated through council. And the disbursements are flexible in order to adapt to the changing conditions that are presented by the proponents. So we have some means to allocate funds for different purposes, different means, either through the bond financing or through the ARPA money, really keep them in two separate columns. The PRA was awarded $19 million in the city's American Rescue Plan Act ordinance. 17 million of that is for affordable housing development, and 2 million for permanent supportive housing. Supportive housing includes those housing that have components for various social services or support networks to address any issues related to the occupants of that housing that may be needed throughout their habitation. The ARPA funds are flexible, to be given as grants or soft debt, and that means debt that may not have to be repaid at the completion of its term. Much more flexibility in the terms. You should note that of those overall funding allocation, 6% is retained by the PRA for indirect administrative supportive costs. So if we look at the spreadsheet, you might see there's a delta in some of those sums of numbers. The units funded solely with the ARPA funds could house families at 65% of the area of the median income for at least 20 years. The housing trust fund monies have an extended requirement of 30 years. So ARPA has got additional flexibility in terms of the time term. And what we do is we mirror many of the other federal grant requirements as it relates to how we fund the different projects that come in before us. So we kind of piggyback on other existing standards that keep us in compliance for the disbursement of those funds. On the handout provided, you can see there's a summary of some of the disbursements that have occurred over the last couple of years. We've got several closed projects, including King Street Commons, Paragon Mills, 106 to 123 Golden Street, the Joseph Taffy Townhomes, Popley Chambers 1, and we're currently in negotiations for Popley Chambers 2 and 3 coming forward. And we have a couple of other pending projects. The Penrose project on parcel 9 down at the I-195 parcel will be closing the next week or so. We're in discussion with Swamp for some of their housing initiatives, Coaching House, Crossroads, 323 Washington Street, Omni Development Corps, and 111 Westminster. So those are pending. The ARPA and direct project reports have gotten to that date to 693 units in total. There is a neighborhood land bank that was established, and part of those ARPA funds were designated into that land bank. And the land bank was a program to acquire, hold, and transfer unused vacant land for the goal of generating new affordable housing and revitalizing Providence neighborhoods. So we continue to assess opportunities, but what we're finding is that really the proponents come with assembled parcels or identified land. We have not been actively out in the marketplace trying to secure vacant property or vacant buildings, just because there's enough coming into us into the pipeline that when it is that funding stream and the requests for those. In addition, we provided a listing of all the Providence redevelopment agency properties. You can see that the holdings have been of the 34 properties, 21 are occupied or being transferred to other city departments. There are 12 in active development, and we have really just one vacant opportunity. Typically, if the lot hasn't been developed or there hasn't been interest, there's usually some underlying condition associated with it, either difficult to develop, it's a constrained parcel, might not have sufficient access, or topographically might not be suitable for building. That kind of gives you an idea of the universe of what we've got in terms of available funding, where the different categories of resources lie, the mechanisms that we use in order to kind of facilitate additional development. What we're seeing now in the market is projects that had originally had monies authorized and now coming back for additional assistance based on increased material costs and the changing in the financing requirements in terms of the percentages, interest rates, which are creating some kind of consternation within the market. So we're trying to address those as they come. We understand that we have to maintain reserves, even though we have many worthy projects that come before us. there's still a need to make sure that we have sufficient funding for follow-up interest by other developments that are occurring. So a lot of this is kind of a very delicate analysis of what's available, what we need to retain for the future, and what are the most urgent and current needs. With that, I'll take a break, and if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to address them.
Is there any questions from the committee members? Councilman.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I really appreciate it. One of the things that you put on your slides was that units funded solely through ARPA money must meet certain criteria. How do you determine which development or which property you go that goes to ARPA and then the other ones go to?
Oh, which go to the housing trust fund?
Right, for funding.
Many times it has to do with the arrangement of the financing structure that the proponent has cobbled together. And again, we're really not the first stop, we're really the last stop. So proponents are going through traditional financing mechanisms, assembling their different levels of financing. And once a gap is identified, then they come and request to see if we could support that project further. Depending on the terms, whether the length or the AMI mix, we determine which one might be the most appropriate funding mechanism. So where the ARPA has a little more flexibility and kind of a one-time infusion of monies, that might be the most relevant. If it's more of a traditional financing structure in terms of its term and the amount of units and the AMI, we find that might be more suitable to go into the bond finance.
Councilman Boggs.
Thank you. I mean, the question is about 22 Riot Street is in development designed by the Development Habitat for Community on the Agreement Community Center and Office. When they going to start working that building? 22 Riot Street.
Oh, yes, it's a good point. That we recently met on that project, and that may change in terms of its designation. So that is in a state of flux, that particular property.
Means what in plain English?
I'm sorry?
Means what, like, we don't know yet what we're going to do with this
We do
building?
not. There was a proposal that was presented to the prior administration that is currently being reviewed for its to see if that's the best use under the current conditions in which we find ourselves. So that will most likely revert back as to a undesignated holding until we get more and better information on that particular property.
I think the issue in that building is the sprinkler system. The fire sprinkler, that's the most expensive one too.
That is a cost burden that's shared by all properties in terms of those like safety issues.
Right.
It is noted that the building is in very good condition. It's in a nice location. It's in the middle of a block in a residential neighborhood, and obviously an old school. But we want to take a fresher look at that particular property and see if there is an appropriate use that would be satisfactory to the community and to the goals of the administration.
Can we use ARPA money to fix up the system, the sprinkler system?
Well, we want to have an identified use for it, and so once those uses are determined, I think it might be amenable to have a potential proponent for development to assume that responsibility of that. So I understand the building is secure, the system is active. There might be some problems with the fire pump and other purchases, but we'd rather, if the building is in decent condition and not under current threat to any inhabitants, that it's empty, that it might be better to keep that in its current condition and wait for it to be designated to another developer or entity that could use it for a better use.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You have a question, Chris?
Yes, please, thank you. Thank you so much, for such a detailed report. Okay, so according to this, we have a balance, of about $9 million left, all right, in the account. Is there any pending request, any future development, trying to measure as to how much we will have left? Just to establish, how quickly we need to come up with some additional dollars.
So everything that you see on this list of the current applicants for financing. Some of these monies come back to the housing trust fund, they replenish as the bond, the terms of their financing have some return component, but not much. So once the ARPA monies are expended, we'll have what's remaining in the bond monies, and the term in which that would be replenished is so far on the horizon that eventually there will be a diminishing amount of funds in order to sustain the housing trust. So we're really, I think it's a credit to the agency that we're able to get that money out of the streets as soon as possible, but it comes with the caveat that once that's expended, we will have to try to find other methods or opportunities to either replenish that account or to find additional funds to assist on the gap financing and return.
And that is my worry, how sustainable will this fund be? So what's the projection? We're gonna have anything in there next year.
Well, at the current request, yeah, I mean, through the next year or so, but it is not a fund that is going to be highly resourced with recurring financing restabilization, if you will. It's once it's out for a long time. There will be some return, after 20-30 years, and the account would hope to maintain its current eligibility, but the funding is going to diminish as the requests come in.
It is extremely necessary, so budget time and time to prize now, because we do need someone in this development. Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
Where does the tax stabilization live? Where is that department? Where you keep up with developers who have taken advantage of the tax stabilization. Where is that in the city?
I can answer that question. So tax stabilization is keeping track of what properties are stabilized is primarily the responsibility of the tax assessor, but there is a tax stabilization group that was formed by the city council in cooperation with the administration, and it's a interdisciplinary committee made up of members of different departments: planning, inspection, finance, assessment, elective, and so forth. This group meets maybe
Monthly.
it's monthly, yeah, under the supervision of the auditor, and also Jacinta Jones, one of your staffers. And so we come together and we talk about all the different stabilizations that are out there? What is the status? Are they staying in compliance with the various agreements and so forth?
That's helpful because when I first came aboard in 2014, there was some concerns about not being able to monitor that well. So I'm glad to hear that. I did not know that there was, because of the concerns, I'm sure that's where the committee came about. Do you know how many developers, how many companies do we still have that's active in the, I know we had a chart one time, I don't know what. I
do not know that. I don't have that information with me, but it's easily accessible. I'd be happy to provide that to you.
Thank you. Any other committee members?
Just a quick follow-up. What is the current AMI? Right? Last time I checked was around 45, 48. Is that still today what that is? Anybody know? Just so I can put a lot of those numbers into
In
account.
terms of income average, I think for the city of Providence, around
51. Like, a lot of references made to this. I don't have a fine number on that. All right, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Is there anything else you guys would like to provide for us? Chris.
Thank you, Chairwoman. For the PRA, when we fund affordable units, what is our annual compliance process for ensuring that those units are affordable over the length of the term?
Okay, so the in almost all, if not all of these, there's money that comes in from other sources, and those sources have their own monitoring component. So for example, if Rhode Island Housing has money in a project, they have a monitoring capability, and so we defer to their monitoring on that. There's also other projects that might have other city money like home, in which case we do the monitoring. Emily Green is here, and she might be able to add to what I just said.
Sure, so I would note on the bulk of our portfolio, we have what we call shared liability for monitoring with either through the development office, through home or CDBG, or through Rhode Island Housing, or through the housing authority. So all of these units are being inspected on a periodic basis, typically according to federal law for basic compatibility, and also for income eligibility tenants. So most have very long-term federally prescribed deed restrictions that would require no less than, sort of every 3 years on-site inspections as well as monitoring.
Is there any project that we funded that doesn't have a mix of that capital stack?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So Chris, I think if you will, piggyback on the work of other agencies in terms of not only their review of projects prior to that, because we're the last ones in, we're in our usually a smaller amount. So it's been facilitated that way, that we kind of embrace the protocol and the requirements of others and leverage that. Otherwise, so we don't duplicate efforts. We have in terms of capacity. We rely a lot on the other funders mechanisms that are within that stack.
Any other questions? My question is about the 34 properties that you mentioned. You said 12, 21 occupied. What is the length of time these properties been with PRA? Is this from the time administration started and the property, or how long have these particular properties been in the PRA? I know this is history.
Yeah, you know. Some of these properties have been in the hands of the PRA since, before my time in the city, and that's more than 20 years. It really varies, and the way that the property comes into the ownership of the PRA varies. Sometimes, the city, transfers the property. That would be the case for, say, 23 Rye Street. That was a city school that became surplus, and the city transferred it. In other cases, there might have been outstanding tax liability, and ultimately the city gained tax title and transferred it to the PRA. So lots of different mechanisms, a long period of time. And in many cases, the PRA will hold property for a brief period of time, clear title, clean the land, in some cases demolish property, and then sell it, and it gets out to the community, and the PRA doesn't own it anymore. In other cases, the PRA maintains ownership and has a long-term lease with a tenant. So there are all sorts of different arrangements for the ownership, the time of ownership, and then ultimately the way the property is disposed of.
So it shouldn't be assumed that these properties are contributing. They are, in many cases, active properties in which there's lots of things happening within them. And we own, if you will, the dirt below it. But they may be a master lessor, maybe, for example, 50 cents. There's a master lessor there who's got multi-tenants, including, I think the city's workforce group is moving down there in a couple of months. There's a microbrewery and other activities. So we will own the underlying asset, if we will, but it is put out to others to activate it and occupy.
Well, that's nice to know it's not just vacant lots that's collected mattresses and all kind of other stuff. Councilman Vargas.
Please. Another question, Director, like, if I can have a better explanation. Okay, when I first came into the council, my first project was 45 DeSoto Street. It's a small bike path behind this, the green, Cohen Greens, they produce ladders, and so this property, 45 DeSoto, belongs to Cohen Greens, right? So at least, so they lease the property to PRA, or how this thing works? Or PRA owns the land where the bike path is.
We will own again, I think we own the underlying property, and then it will be activated and used by others, or used in conjunction with a broader vision. So I'm not familiar with exactly the 45 DeSoto. But part of these properties will kind of get encompassed into, for instance, some of the Great Streets initiatives, or the Greenway initiatives, and they become part of the assemblage of a larger concept. So as to the specifics of 45 DeSoto, I'm not sure what role that plays in that larger context. Are you familiar with the particular parcel at all, or?
Not know, but I'm very familiar with the bike path.
I can speak to my understanding.
The question is, who owns this bike path? Or
Yeah.
like, let's say like in 40 years, that this bike path will go with the Cohen Greens, or it's going to be under the
No.
city?
I do think this table may not be completely correct. So 45 DeSoto is simply that linear
Yeah,
piece of land that has the bike path on it. That is owned free and clear by the redevelopment agency. I don't believe that it will be merged with 555 Outlaws. In fact, it was actually subdivided out of 555 Outlaws. 555 Outlaws is Gotham Greens. So I'm gonna make a note here that I think we need to clear up this.
Correct.
I think that the intention is that the redevelopment agency owns that stretch of land in perpetuity for use as a bike path.
Right, thank you.
When, are we expecting a comprehensive plan to begin, or has it begun already?
Well, internally, it's effectively begun. We're preparing our resources and our personnel. We're really at this point finalizing the schedule, some of the details associated with the rollout and the announcement of it. We also look forward to the opportunity to, prior to a larger public rollout, to meet with council and hear your concerns and to discuss the particulars of that. But we are looking sometime in the month of May, beginning of May, in order to find a date in which we can make that public announcement of the start. And then would shortly be followed with a public charrette, if you will, a visioning initiative within the community at a location to be determined. And then the hope is that as the summer months proceed into the fall, that we found a touch point within all of the council districts in order to meet with your neighbors and community members to hear their input as we kind of discuss what has changed in the last 10 years and where the city of Providence hopes to go in the next decade. So we'll be hearing more of that the next couple of weeks to begin to put those times and places together on the calendar.
Will there be a strategic push for to try to repair some of the outdated housing stock that we have? You know, the fact that we are in this housing condition, simply because I guess strategically we haven't prepared down the road. Would the comprehensive plan cover a lot of housing detailed, or how would we expect to move from the city around pushing for housing?
I think it is at its base a land use planning initiative, and I think we should be careful about separating the two kind of planning initiatives from the comprehensive plan, which is somewhat of a formulaic process in which we look at the areas by the zoning designations. You know, we move parcel boundaries and whatnot, but in addition to that, throughout the process, obviously we'll hear from the community about their concerns and their priorities. And those types of issues get channeled into, I would consider, more planning and development initiatives. So the comprehensive plan will take a path that is particular to the state requirements associated with it, while the ideas generated and other concepts that come up will continue on a kind of a different trajectory as we begin to flesh out those hopes and ambitions and aspirations in the community. Well, do you have more?
Yeah, just following up on what Joe said. So one of the primary elements of the comprehensive plan is housing. So we do talk about land use and we talk about housing in a few different ways in the comprehensive plan. We talk about housing production from the standpoint of how we use our land, the kind of densities that we want to see. So part of it is making land available for housing production through zoning and land use policy. But then within the housing element of the comprehensive plan, a lot of that discussion is around what the priorities are for improving housing, developing housing, funding housing, and certainly the state of repair of housing is something that we would expect to address in the comprehensive plan, along with other funding repairs, and improvements along with funding new construction of housing. Those we would expect to see within the housing element.
And does that, you said that sort of complements with the state and what the state comes up with as well? Your work.
Yeah, so we have the state mandate for comprehensive planning and what has to be in the comprehensive plan. And then, of course, the state has its own housing programs that are, you know, these days sit in a couple of different places. But for sure, coordination of our housing programs with the housing programs of the state, that's absolutely of the highest priority for us.
Is there any more questions from the committee? I will, before, Chris, 1 second, before I forget my memory, I would like to entertain a motion to, add this into our records. And I would entertain a motion that it be exhibit 1B, 1A, sorry.
So
Motion been made, second by, Councilman Peters. All in favor? Ayes have it. Chris.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. Going back to the funding of the housing trust fund. Has the PRA thought about what would be the best way to recapitalize the fund, or what are your suggestions going forward to maintain a stable housing trust fund?
Some of the strategies involve the terms in which we loan the money. Previously, they've been, I won't say generous, but they were less restrictive. We need to find some mechanisms to add some additional interest rates to that within the thresholds that are allowed, so that we can begin to realize some recurring payments back into the fund. I'm not sure if we had other strategies associated with that, then you might want to address. That would be a good idea.
Similar to that, typically when you are funding a short-term construction lending or bridge financing, that will start to roll back and revolve faster than oftentimes what we're seeing from developers are requests for permanent financing, which typically have amortization schedules from anywhere between 20 and 40 years. So obviously the monthly debt service, or if any, is much lower. So to the extent that we can figure out how we can better serve the construction or bridge financing, that would accelerate repayments into the trust. And then, of course, I would say generally that the most recent notice of funding availability that PRA put out, as well as Rhode Island Housing, shows that there is more than enough development pipeline and capacity that any money that we can find to further capitalize our trust would be used up by many eligible projects that are still right on the.
I think it's fair to say too that the more vulnerable the population and the lower the AMI, the less return we're gonna hope to see on some of those investments. So as we build units of greater density at lower AMIs, that ends up absorbing most of the funds, and with not a lot of return coming back at the end of the day, or the term being so long that it's not actualized in a timely manner that we'd be able to turn it around again quicker to get back out the streets.
What was the initial investment that we leveraged for the bond?
24,746,000.
Buckets.
Director, that's the money that we have now, $24 million?
No, that was the original funding in April of 2021.
Do we know how much we have?
Oh, yes, it's from the chart here, the remaining under the. We've got under the bond, uncommitted, I mean, we still have monies. That have been allocated for pending projects. So if we take out the pending projects that are in the pipeline, will leave us with a remainder of $850,000, 521.
Plus the ARPA money, right?
And the ARPA money,
Will be the $17 million.
also being committed and being funded. So the total remaining in all those sources is $9 million from uncommitted funds.
Better start calling those people to pay back.
There's so much need out there, counselor, and the levels of the costs associated with doing work, it's a difficult time to
Yeah.
prop up, using those tools that we have at our disposal, either discounted land, financing mechanisms. We can't control construction costs, we can't control, national interest rates. So where we have those levers to facilitate the need, it's gonna go quick, we do what we can.
Yeah, just to note, so the ARPA money is intended not to come back.
Mhm.
In fact, if money comes back, then my understanding is that it's a very complex process where we have to start paying the federal government back. It doesn't come back to us. So that money is essentially like a grant,
Right.
imagine it that way. And in terms of the bond funding, as Joe said, because this money is sort of the last in, they've gotten all their bank financing, they've gotten all their conventional financing where they make payments. This money is just filling a gap, and very often the way the pro forma is intended is that it's money that's designed to be deployed for a very long term. And I think the point of the money is that not so much that it's a revolving fund that where the money keeps coming back, but it fills the gap and it leverages the other money to produce units. I think that in order for the housing trust fund to be sustainable over the long term, it's gonna require new infusions of money, not rely on money to recycle and come back. It's really not designed that way.
I think it's worth noting too that an affordable unit, its construction costs are somewhere between $350,000 to $400,000 typically. So regardless of the occupancy or the use, the cost is very fixed and very substantial. So for the return that we've had of that investment of nearly 700 units today, I think is a good cause for success and the appreciation that money was utilized and got out into the street very quickly to secure those amount of units in a short period of time.
Yeah. It's one. It's probably very similar to what you just asked, but it's just, I'm gonna ask it again. So what are we looking, because of what you said about, where we need to continuously find infusions of money for this particular trust fund, what are we looking at to do that? Because I think that this is $9 million for, and it seems as though with a lot of the projects that are going on or potentially coming up, it seems like this will plummet or deplete pretty quickly. So, can you give some idea or indication of what's out there, what you're looking for, what you're seeking, what's been presented, anything in terms of any sort of
flushing of money that can come through?
Yeah, well, it's
Besides the
not,
budget.
it's not gonna be of the magnitude in which the original infusion occurred. One is, amending our terms and our interest rates in terms of trying to secure some future return to replenishment. We're looking at the potential of sale of any other property in the future, that those proceeds go back to the housing trust fund. There is, at that point, that is not gonna provide the sufficient amount of financing to get back to the levels that the housing trust initially had. So in many ways, it's a finite resource that will diminish over time. I don't know if with the other strategies we thought that might be able to supplement that, but it's a diminishing finite resource.
Do you believe that we should be at that $24 million level or more? That initial investment of $24 million, do you believe that we should be at that or more?
Constantly?
Yeah,
I mean, that would be difficult. That's probably a question better to the chief of finance for the city. I'm not sure what the cost was of issuing that bond and the terms in which it has to be repaid through the city. So it depends on how much the city could leverage that type of debt and carry those type of bonds in the future. Or some other large federal program
right.
we might not have vision towards. But I think we can all agree the ARPA funding was a significant, rare occasion.
It came in clutch, yes, absolutely. The reason I ask is because obviously we're feeling it here in the city of Providence, but the housing crisis is very much a national crisis. So the investments that are going to be made federally, I'm sure at some point, hopefully will trickle down. So I'm trying to kind of envision what that presents for us as a city. That's why I was curious.
So can we say that the only source of stable funding that we have for this is the percentage of the DSA that we get?
That is one of the replenishing amounts that is consistent, yes. The others that are going to come back from the financing are not going to be significant and would be not timely. I think the amounts of monies that were available came at a critical time in the city period, the change in interest rates and the accelerating construction costs. I would argue that the timeliness of this saved a lot of projects or kept a lot of them viable. Without these monies, I think you'd see very less activity in terms of delivering units to the community. So I think we should be grateful for that opportunity we've had, but in terms of having something in perpetuity, it's going to be a challenge.
Just one last question that I have. I'm looking at the bond money and how it was distributed. Would we have been able to give Westminster Street $10 million in gap money if ARPA would not have existed? Would we have been able to still be able to do this, give out the $10 million in such a big number?
I think
For Westminster Street, and they have, I think, what is this, 57 units affordable, all 57?
I think it became a matter of opportunity with this funding, that there was a source readily identifiable that could be designated for it. In terms of alternatives, I would not know enough about where those alternatives would lie. And Mike indicated that the city's participation in that might have been less or not at all without the availability of these funds.
Yeah.
And I also, just to add to what Madam Chair just expressed, the number of units, it's not that significant, and it's only 57 units. Each unit, it means a lot, but it's not like other projects. But the AMI is from 80 to 120%. Which in my rough estimate means you gotta make over $60,000 to be able to afford a unit there. And that's actually what we're dealing with today. That for you to live in a 2-bedroom apartment, you gotta make $34,000, which is around $74,000 a year. And our population cannot do that. So when I'm looking at this 80 to 120%, that's way up there. And like you said, Chair, so we're putting $10 million into a project that generates 50% apartment, and it's at a pretty high price.
I mean, it's a significant structure in the city's landscape. Any type of units that can be delivered are going to work their way out to the market and begin to relieve or add additional capacity to the overall marketplace. So, well, we might not have the amount of units that are returned based on other more strategic, affordable developments that have occurred that are then, which are themselves supported by specialized financing mechanisms specific to those MIA with affordable units. Without knowing the details of the 111 Westminster financing structure, there's going to be probably a larger market-based financing structure that is going to justify all the other units that are going to come along that might not be within the affordable definition, but they are needed in order to support the overall supply of units into the market. So I think there's more room for discussion as that project begins to come into focus, but this was a placeholder in order to somehow, I think, stabilize that discussion and use that as a point of departure for further analysis.
And I hope there is, and I'm sure there is. I'm just trying to make sense out of the numbers in front of me, just on the surface. Thank you.
Chris,
On that project, what if a project or any project funded by these funds does not go to completion? Do we recoup the entire 10 million?
Yes, if it doesn't conform with the term and condition.
That money's not, we haven't given that money out.
So are you talking about any project? Is it?
Well, I mean, I raise it based on this project.
Then it would be in default condition, then the money would have to be reimbursed if they fall into default.
So it's earmarked for that project, but it hasn't been.
It's still sitting in there's been no kind of claiming of those monies. It's just set aside.
And so what is a typical timeline for development that you allow an investment like that to sit in a project?
Every project has its own peculiarities to it and its own challenges. Some start and then stop, others come through very quickly and put out, but it's a fair question to answer. Do we have a term or time for that designation? And currently there is no hard stop in terms of where that money should be, when it should be allocated or used.
So if other projects come up that are like shovel ready or come to PRA, they would not be. There's no weighting of timelines and feasibility and AMI levels.
It is, I think ultimately, are you talking about different projects that might come in? there is a new administration, a new group of staff at the PRA. And we're working to develop some additional criteria that we want to see for applicants who are coming in. Right now, I think a lot of what we're seeing going out the door right now is stuff that had already been in the pipeline that we're servicing in order to keep those projects going, including projects that are effectively commenced, and we're playing catch up on some of these projects. Others that are, waiting for their final completion stack. Those are some things that we can take a harder look at under the current lens of the perspective of the administration now.
Would it also be the PRA's responsibility, not only with like changing those guidelines on how we disseminate funding, but the recapitalization of the housing trust fund, or would that be a different department looking at the financing piece? Stabilization.
The rent stabilization?
No, the money coming into, or what would be needed to invest in the housing trust fund.
I think we have to partner with all players in the city hall to find strategies. I mean, we can play our little parts with some of the mechanisms that we talked about, but it is warranted market discussion. If this wants to be an ongoing enterprise.
Okay. Well, thank you again. I know there's many more questions that we stumble along throughout the finance afternoon. And some of the questions may come out of your area. We're looking forward to speaking with you. We also would like, if there's anything this committee can do as far as if you could offer some type of recommendation or something like that, that would be helpful for us to be able to assist you, even whether it's in the comprehensive plan or anything that you're struggling with around zoning or whatever. This committee is here for that as well. So please, we're just looking to make sure that whatever we do, that we make an impact on the conditions that we're up against right now. So we appreciate what we've been able to bring today. If we are moving out of the subject simply because I have to move into another meeting shortly after. But in the same breath, we have another item on the table. So thank you, it's been very informational.
Thank you, Madam
There is
Chair.
no further questions. I don't want to cut anybody off. I entertain.
And as usual, we're always available.
Thank you so much. You've been very helpful.
If there's any information that you think of after the meeting that we can send over to you, we're happy to provide that.
We appreciate that, absolutely. With that being said, yes, we are, dear, so we move in. So with that being said, we're gonna move to the second item on the Madam Clerk, remind me the name.
Item number 2, discussion and possible vote of the task force mission and vision statement.
So at this point, Chris, I'm gonna open the floor to you to a little bit discuss this and then find out what feedback did you get from our committee members.
Sure, thank you, Chairwoman.
I would love that. This would be my plan.
Thank you.
I really regret the other day that it's too much.
So the policy team has drafted the mission and vision for the task force. We gave this to each member at the last meeting. And our goal was, at the request of Leader Harris, to sort of put into words some framing for the task force. The first part is the mission, the second part is the vision, sort of getting to how we are going to work through this complicated issue. We haven't gotten substantial feedback, so I would like to open it up for discussion, as I know you're all very busy. but I'm happy to read it if you'd like me to read it.
Yes, let's take it from the mission.
Sure.
Stop, and then we'll go into the mission.
The mission of the Housing Crisis Task Force is to develop and implement policy solutions that address the critical need for safe, affordable housing throughout the city. Our goal is to minimize the displacement of existing residents, increase housing security, and promote neighborhood stability.
So at this point, we're gonna open it up to the committee if there's anything that you feel council left on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I did have a brief opportunity to look at this, and I share my points with Sally from our policy office. I think it's right on point, because this is a policy focused based committee that was put together with this purpose. I think it's clearly defined what the mission is, and also the vision will be. And I commend those came together to produce this very great document.
Thank you. Councilman Peters.
I too, I loved it. I think that, and I reviewed it a bunch of times and there was nothing that I could really say that didn't, wasn't already captured here. If there's one thing, as I'm thinking about it right now, it's, and it's something that I was remembering based on the conversation we just had, but it's, I think it's extremely important to address the equity within our housing as well, like making sure that we have that we prioritize maybe all of our underserved communities and making sure that distribution of housing or whatever this continues to be always has that mindset and that forethought in it as well. That's it.
Would you like to see that written into the statement as well?
Sure. Maybe not in the mission, but perhaps the vision.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, that's, I would think it would fit more in the vision, so. Chris, can you read the vision?
Sure. Our vision for the task force is to gather information from experts and community stakeholders to inform our policy decisions. Our top priority in this effort is to support our existing residents in access to safe, stable housing to bolster community cohesion and promote thriving neighborhoods. Our second priority is to promote a diversity of sustainable and affordable housing options throughout the city that will support growth and resiliency for our current residents and future generations.
And maybe it's a slide that, I think it kind of says it actually.
But I do think we can add,
Well, it says sustainable, equitable. and
Yes.
equitable.
Yes.
yeah,
Just the
There you go.
equitable and they will add
Mhm.
together.
Yeah. That
yes.
I think that's it overall. I think it was great. It was really well done,
Yeah.
well put together. And there is really much more I think we could add.
I like the equity part, absolutely. We need to point out. Yeah, say it out loud. Yeah.
Right.
The last paragraph, you have put that could be our soundbite for wherever we go, media and everything. Let's say the same thing over and over.
Yeah, we have witnessed an increase in displacement and suffering in our neighborhoods over the course of the last 3 years and are driven to take actions toward the better provenance. And then we compiled, Sally and I, a whole list of housing related data. Some which came from the Housing Fact Book, Director Brenda Clement is here in the audience, and some other local sources data.
And so, would we want to pass it tonight with the amendment that is being added?
Adding equity.
The equity part, that was the only thing that was added was the equity.
Right.
Can we pass it tonight? I would entertain a motion to pass it with the, as amended. The motion been made and seconded by Councilman Peterson. All in favor? Aye. All right, now we have a vision and a mission statement. We are gonna get ready to set up for our next, meeting, which is the Earth meeting. And so I'm gonna entertain a motion to adjourn. Maybe my motion, second, I think there, all in favor, aye, the ayes have it. Also,